The tray didn't drop. That would have been cliché. Instead, Genevieve froze, her knuckles turning white against the silver platter of champagne. The ringtone wasn't a digital chime. It was a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the marrow of every shifter in the grand ballroom, a frequency of bone and old magic. She answered it without thinking, her eyes glazing over, the polite mask of the Omega slipping. The words that tumbled from her lips weren't English, nor the modern Pack dialects. They were Val Kern, the dead tongue of the first wolves. Across the room, Draven Void, the Alpha King who hadn't looked at a woman with anything but disdain in a century, stopped mid-sentence. His glass shattered in his grip. The silence that followed was louder than a scream. The Skylark Hotel was a monument to excess, a sprawling cathedral of glass and steel built upon the ruins of the old human city. Tonight, it smelled of pine, ozone, and the metallic tang of too much power concentrated in one room. It was the night of the Ascendant, the annual gala where the 12-pack alphas gathered to swear fealty to the crown. Genevieve Lightwood adjusted the collar of her uniform, the starch scratching against the sensitive skin of her neck. As an Omega, and a seemingly wolfless one at that, she was the lowest of the low. To the glitterati sipping vintage blood wine and discussing territory disputes, she was furniture. A ghost in a black waistcoat. She preferred it that way. Invisibility was safety. "Table 4 needs a refill on the reserve," hissed Marco, the floor manager, a weaselly beta with a comb-over that smelled of nervous sweat. "And don't look anyone in the eye, Lightwood. The Void King is in a mood." "Is he ever not?" Genevieve murmured, grabbing a fresh bottle. "Careful," Marco snapped. "He'll tear your throat out for a whisper." Genevieve didn't fear Draven Void for his violence. She feared him for his silence. The Alpha King was a legend of brutality, the man who had united the warring factions by slaughtering the entire Council of Elders in a single night. They called him the Void, not just because of his surname, but because of what he felt like to be around, a black hole of dominance that sucked the air out of the room. She moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of a survivor. She wove between hulking alphas in tuxedos that cost more than her life's rent, avoiding trailing tails and sweeping gowns. The air was thick with pheromones, dominance, lust, aggression. To an Omega's sensitive nose, it was a headache waiting to happen. She kept her head down, her scent masked by heavy suppressants. She brewed herself from wolfsbane and nettle. She reached table 4, located dangerously close to the dais where the high table sat. As she poured the wine, she felt the temperature drop. The chatter in the immediate vicinity died down. Draven Void had entered. He didn't walk. He stalked. He was taller than the others, broad-shouldered in a way that made the bespoke black suit look like it was struggling to contain a natural disaster. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, slicked back from a face that was severe, angular, and devastatingly handsome. But it was his eyes that stopped hearts. Violet, the color of a storm at twilight, the mark of the apex. He sat at the head of the high table, looking bored. An alpha female from the river pack draped herself over his arm, whispering something suggestive. Draven didn't even blink. He looked like a man watching a play he had seen 1,000 times and hated the first time. Genevieve felt a strange pull in her chest, a thrumming beat that wasn't her heart. She ignored it. She finished pouring and turned to retreat into the shadows. "Be invisible," she told herself. "Just get through the shift, get the tips, pay for Grandma's dialysis, disappear." But the universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Her pocket buzzed. It shouldn't have. She had turned her phone off. Employees were strictly forbidden from having personal devices on the floor. Panic flared in her chest. She reached for her apron pocket to silence it, but the buzzing wasn't mechanical. It was hot, searing against her hip. A sound began to emanate from her pocket. Not a ringtone, a hum, a low throat-singing chant that sounded like wind howling through a canyon. Om Vra Ka. A few heads turned. Marco was staring at her from the kitchen doors, his eyes wide with horror. Genevieve's fingers fumbled for the device, but her hand froze. A voice spoke in her mind, clear as a bell, overriding her fear, overriding her logic. "The seal is breaking, little wolf. Answer." She didn't want to. She had to. She pulled the phone out. The screen was black, save for a single glowing rune in the center. A rune she hadn't seen since she was a child, traced in the dust by a woman whose face she could barely remember. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a toast, but the predator quiet of a stalk. Genevieve pressed the rune. The voice on the other end didn't speak English. It didn't speak the guttural common wolf tongue. It spoke in a series of clicks, growls, and harmonic whistles that sounded like birdsong distorted by a thunderstorm. "Cala Vendor, Sol Invictus, Morta." The gate opens. The sun dies. Death is here. Genevieve's consciousness seemed to split. One part of her was the terrified waitress, standing in the middle of the most dangerous room in the city, holding a contraband phone. The other part was something ancient, something that had been sleeping in her blood, woken by the frequency of the call. Her mouth opened, and she answered, "Vaktar, Javal, Dracum nox est." Her voice changed. It wasn't the soft, melodic alto of Genevieve the waitress. It was deeper, layered with a subharmonic growl that vibrated the crystal glasses on the tables. "The void is listening. The night eats itself." The translation flashed through her mind, but she didn't know how she knew it. The language was Valkern. It was forbidden. It was extinct. It was the language the first wolves used to bind demons and move mountains. To speak it was heresy. To speak it in front of the king was suicide. At the high table, the sound of breaking glass was like a gunshot. Draven Void had crushed his champagne flute. Blood, dark and rich, mingled with the sparkling wine dripping from his hand. He didn't look at his injury. His violet eyes were locked on Genevieve, with a focus that felt like a physical weight. The alpha female beside him recoiled, sensing the sudden terrifying spike in his aura. Genevieve blinked, the trance snapping as quickly as it had come. The phone in her hand turned to ash, literal gray ash, that crumbled through her fingers to the floor. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. She looked up. Every eye in the room was on her. 300 apex predators staring at the Omega in the cheap uniform. But she only saw one. Draven stood up. His chair scraped backward with a screech that made everyone flinch. "Who?" Draven's voice was low, a rumble of tectonic plates shifting. "Spoke?" Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Run. The instinct was overwhelming. Run and never stop. She choked out, her voice back to normal, small and terrified. "I apologize, Your Majesty. My phone. It malfunctioned. I will leave immediately." She turned on her heel, dropping the silver tray with a clang that echoed like a funeral bell. She bolted toward the service doors. "Seize her!" Draven commanded. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command carried the weight of the alpha voice, a psychic compulsion that forced obedience. 2 massive guards by the kitchen doors lunged for her. Genevieve saw them coming. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the trajectory of the guard's hand reaching for her shoulder. She saw the opening to his left. She shouldn't have been fast enough. She was an Omega. She was weak. But as the guard's hand closed, she twisted. A fluid, unnatural movement that bent her spine at an impossible angle. She slipped under his arm, sliding across the polished floor on her knees, and scrambled up. Surprise! It rippled through the room. An Omega dodging an elite guard. Impossible. Genevieve hit the swing doors and burst into the kitchen. "Move!" she screamed at the chefs, vaulting over a prep station. Behind her, the double doors exploded off their hinges. Not opened, exploded. Wood splinters rained down into the soup pots. Draven Void walked through the wreckage. He wasn't running. He was simply moving, devouring the space between them with terrifying inevitability. His bloodied hand hung at his side, the scent of his copper-rich blood sending the kitchen staff to their knees in submission. Genevieve reached the back exit, the metal heavy and cold. It was locked. She slammed her shoulder against it. "Open, damn you!" She felt a shadow fall over her. The air turned freezing cold. The scent of rain, ozone, and something darker, like turning earth in a graveyard, enveloped her. "Turn around," Draven said. She froze. The Alpha command washed over her, a tidal wave demanding she submit, that she bare her neck. She gritted her teeth. She clenched her fists. Sweat beaded on her forehead. No. She turned, slowly, not in submission, but in defiance. She pressed her back against the steel door, looking up, up, up into the face of the king. Draven stopped 3 feet from her. He looked down, his violet eyes swirling with a mixture of rage and confusion. "You resisted," he whispered, sounding more shocked than angry. "You answered the old call, and you resisted me." He reached out, his hand, the one still dripping blood, hovering near her face. He didn't touch her. He inhaled deeply, sampling her scent near the pulse of her throat. "What are you?" he murmured, "because you are certainly no Omega." The holding cell was nicer than Genevieve's apartment. That was the first thing she noticed when the adrenaline finally crashed, leaving her shaking and nauseous. It was a suite, really, located in the penthouse levels of the Skylark, but the biometric locks on the windows and the 2 elite guards stationed outside the door made its purpose clear. She paced the Persian rug, her mind racing. Val Kern. Why had she spoken it? She didn't know the language. She barely passed high school French. But when that phone rang, or rather, when that rock buzzed, the words had been there, waiting on her tongue like a memory she hadn't lived. And the message. "The seal is breaking." What seal? She went to the bathroom and splashed freezing water on her face. Her reflection looked pale, her brown eyes wide and haunted. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder from where the guards had finally grabbed her in the alleyway, after she'd managed to blind the first one with cayenne pepper from a spice rack. "Stupid," she whispered to herself. "You just assaulted the king's guard. You're dead. You're so dead." The door chimed. It slid open with a soft hiss. Draven entered. He had changed. Gone was the blood-spattered tuxedo, replaced by a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with faint silver scars. He held a glass of amber liquid in one hand and a tablet in the other. The guards moved to follow him in. "Leave us," Draven said, "and disable the audio feed." "Sire, she is dangerous," the captain of the guard protested. "She moves like an assassin." "She is a waitress with a spice fetish," Draven deadpanned, not looking up from his tablet. "If I cannot handle her, I do not deserve the crown. Out." The guards bowed and retreated. The door sealed shut. Draven walked to the wet bar, poured a second glass, and set it on the coffee table. He sat on the velvet sofa, spreading his legs, relaxed yet coiled. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a command this time, it was an offer. Genevieve stayed by the bathroom door. "I'd rather stand." Draven looked at her, his violet eyes assessing. Genevieve Lightwood, age 24, orphaned at 6, raised by a grandmother, Alara Lightwood, currently in hospice care at St. Jude's. You work double shifts. You have no criminal record. You have no PAC affiliation. Your medical records list you as a grade D Omega with low fertility and minimal shifting ability. He set the tablet down. "On paper, you are the most boring creature in my city." "I aim to please," Genevieve said, her voice trembling slightly. "And yet," Draven swirled his drink, "tonight you spoke a dialect that hasn't been heard in 3,000 years. A dialect that, according to legend, requires an alpha soul of the purest lineage to even pronounce without the vocal cords shredding." He took a sip. "And then you resisted a direct alpha command from the king." He stood up abruptly. Genevieve flinched, backing into the door frame. Draven closed the distance, but slowly this time. He stopped a foot away. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. The heat radiating off him was intoxicating, a dry, woodsy heat. "Who called you?" he asked softly. "I don't know," Genevieve whispered. "It was a blocked number, a weird phone." "Where's the phone?" It turned to dust. Ash. Draven studied her face. He was looking for a lie. He was an expert at sniffing out deceit. He could smell the chemical change in sweat when someone lied. "You're telling the truth," he murmured, sounding disappointed, or perhaps worried. "You have no idea what you are." "I'm a waitress," she insisted, tears prickling her eyes. "Please, I just want to go home. Your grandmother is safe," Draven cut in. "I've already had her moved to the royal wing of the hospital. The best doctors in the Dominion are attending to her as we speak." Genevieve's jaw dropped. "What? Why?" "Leverage," Draven said simply. "Because you are not leaving." "You can't keep me here. I haven't done anything." "You spoke the words of unbinding, Genevieve." Draven's face hardened. "Do you know what that means? It means you are a key. And there are factions in this city, my enemies, the Shadow Council, the rogue hordes, who would peel your skin off inch by inch to get you to speak those words again." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He raised a hand, and with surprising gentleness, tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her skin, sending a jolt of electricity through her that made her knees buckle. Draven's eyes widened slightly. He felt it too. The mate spark. Faint, suppressed, but undeniable. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "I am not keeping you here to punish you," Draven said, his voice rougher now. "I am keeping you here because if you walk out that door, you will be dead by morning, and I—" He paused, looking at his hand, then back at her. The mask of the king slipped, revealing a man who looked incredibly tired and profoundly lonely. "I need to know why the ancient tongue sounds like a song when you speak it," he confessed, "instead of a curse." He walked to the door. "The bedroom is yours. Order whatever you like from the kitchen, but do not try to leave. The windows are reinforced impact glass. The drop is 60 stories. "Draven," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He stopped, his hand on the panel. "That call," she said, her voice shaking. "They said the seal is breaking. What seal?" Draven didn't turn around. His shoulders tensed, the fabric of his shirt straining. "The seal that keeps the monsters out," he said grimly. "Sleep well, Genevieve. Tomorrow we find out if you are my salvation or my apocalypse." The door slid shut, locking with a definitive thud. Genevieve was alone in the cage of velvet and shadow, but as she looked at her reflection in the darkened window, she saw something new. Her eyes, usually a soft brown, were flecked with gold, and deep in her chest, the wolf she thought didn't exist threw back its head and howled. Genevieve didn't sleep. How could she? The bed was softer than clouds, the sheets made of silk that probably cost more than her entire education, but the room felt like a breathless lung. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the hum. Om Vra Ka. When the door hissed open at dawn, she was already dressed in the fresh clothes left for her, a utilitarian gray jumpsuit that fit a little too perfectly. Draven didn't say good morning. He stood in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept either. The darkness under his eyes only made the violet of his irises piercingly bright. "Come," he said. "We have work to do." He led her not to an interrogation room, but down, past the lobby, past the parking garage, into a private elevator that required a retinal scan, a voice print, and a drop of his blood to open. They descended into the bedrock beneath the city. "Where are we going?" Genevieve asked, the silence stretching taut between them. "The Iron Library," Draven replied. "The history books tell you the first wolves died out in the Great War. They lie. We didn't die out. We just went underground." The elevator doors opened onto a cavernous space carved from obsidian. Rows upon rows of iron shelves stretched into the gloom, filled not with paper books, but with tablets of stone, scrolls of dragon skin, and jars containing glowing memories. The air smelled of ozone and ancient dust. Draven led her to a central table where a single jagged piece of slate lay. "This," he said, gesturing to the slate, "is a fragment of the first edict. It has been silent for 1,000 years. No alpha, no oracle, no witch has been able to read it." He looked at her, his expression intense. "Read it." Genevieve stepped closer. The symbols on the slate looked like claw marks, chaotic and violent. "I can't. I told you I don't know. Don't look with your eyes," Draven commanded, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating in her chest. "Look with the part of you that answered the phone, the part of you that defied a king." He stepped behind her. He didn't touch her, but his heat radiated against her back, a solid wall of alpha dominance. She could smell him, cedar, rain, and the metallic tang of raw power. It was dizzying. "Focus, Genevieve," he whispered near her ear. Her breath hitched. The proximity was overwhelming. Her inner wolf, usually a cowering, silent thing, was pacing in her chest, drawn to him. She looked at the slate again. The claw marks seemed to wriggle. The hum started in her ears. The king, blood, night. "I see," she stammered. "I see a crown, but it's broken." Draven stiffened. "Go on." "The crown of the void is a shackle," she read, the words forming in her mind before her mouth shaped them. "The king binds the dark, but the queen—" She stopped. The rune flared red in her mind's eye. "Read it!" Draven growled, his hands gripping the edge of the table on either side of her, trapping her. "But the queen is the key," she whispered. "When the sun is eaten, she will turn the lock, and the void shall drink the world." The slate cracked. A hairline fracture ran down the center of the ancient stone. Genevieve gasped and pulled back, bumping into Draven's chest. His arms came around her instinctively to steady her, hard bands of muscle. For a second, she was enveloped in him. She looked up, and he was looking down, his face a mask of conflict. "The queen," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips, then snapping back to her eyes. "There has not been a void queen in 5 centuries. The bloodline was hunted to extinction." "I'm not a queen," Genevieve said, her voice trembling. "I'm a waitress. I serve drinks. I don't turn locks." "You are not a waitress," Draven said, his grip on her arms tightening just enough to bruise, possessive and desperate. "You are an impossibility. And you just read a prophecy that says you are going to destroy my kingdom." Before Genevieve could answer, the lights in the library flickered. The deep seismic hum she had heard on the phone returned, vibrating through the obsidian floor. Draven released her instantly, spinning around. A sword materialized in his hand, not drawn from a sheath, but formed from the shadows themselves, solidifying into black steel. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "What is it?" "The Shadow Council," Draven snarled, his canines lengthening. "They found us." The attack didn't come from the elevator. It came from the shadows. The darkness between the bookshelves seemed to detach itself, rising up into tall, faceless forms, hollows, constructs of dark magic, soul eaters used by the rogue factions. They had no scent, made no sound, and moved with a glitching, unnatural speed. There were dozens of them. "Run to the vault," Draven roared, shoving Genevieve toward a heavy circular door at the back of the chamber. He threw himself into the horde. Genevieve scrambled back, watching in horror and awe. She had heard stories of the Alpha King's power, but seeing it was different. He was a blur of violence. He moved faster than thought, his shadow blade shearing through the hollows like smoke. Every time he struck, violet lightning arced from the blade, illuminating the cavern in strobe light flashes. But for every hollow he destroyed, 2 more rose from the floor. Genevieve reached the vault door. It was locked. She frantically punched the keypad, but it was dead. The power was cut. She turned around. A hollow had slipped past Draven. It was sliding toward her, a humanoid shape of pure void, its face a blank swirling abyss. It raised a hand, and the air around it froze. "Draven!" she screamed. Draven turned, distracted for a fraction of a second. A hollow slammed into him from behind, its claws raking down his back. He roared, a sound of pure primal fury, and backhanded the creature, shattering it. But he was too far away. The hollow in front of Genevieve lunged. She threw her hands up, bracing for death. She didn't want to die. She wanted to live. She wanted to know why she had gold in her eyes. She wanted to know why the king looked at her like she was the only star in the sky. A word ripped itself from her throat, not English, not common. "Lux Vestra." It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a detonation. A shockwave of pure white gold light exploded from her body. It blinded her. It knocked the wind out of her. When her vision cleared, the hollow in front of her was gone, vaporized. The shockwave had rippled outward, knocking the other hollows back, dissolving their shadowy forms like mist in the sun. Even Draven had been pushed back a few feet, shielding his eyes. Silence fell over the library, heavy and ringing. Genevieve stood there, her hands still raised, trembling. Her skin was glowing. Faint golden veins pulsed beneath the surface of her arms, fading slowly as her heart rate dropped. Draven lowered his sword. The shadow steel dissolved back into air. He was bleeding, dark stains on his gray shirt, but he didn't seem to notice. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. He walked over the ash of the disintegrated monsters. He stopped before her, wary, as if approaching a bomb. "Light," he breathed. "You wield the sunfire." I don't know what I did," she sobbed, the adrenaline crashing. Her legs gave out. Draven caught her before she hit the floor. He swept her up into his arms, holding her against his chest. He felt solid, warm, an anchor in the spinning world. "I know what you did," he said grimly, turning back toward the elevator. "You just painted a target on your back the size of the moon. If the council didn't know you were the key before, they certainly do now." "Put me down," she murmured weakly. "You're hurt." "I've had worse from shaving," he lied. "Hold on, we're compromised. We have to leave the city." They took a heavy armored SUV from the lower garage, exiting through a forgotten service tunnel that spilled them out onto the coastal highway. The city of Obsidian Bay glittered behind them, beautiful and treacherous. Draven drove like he fought, precise, aggressive, and fast. They sped north, toward the Blackwood Forest, the ancestral territory of the Void Pack. Genevieve sat in the passenger seat, clutching a first aid kit she'd found in the glove box. "Pull over," she said. "We can't stop." "You're bleeding all over the leather," she snapped. "Pull over, Draven, now." Whether it was the shock of being ordered around or the loss of blood, Draven actually listened. He pulled the car onto a secluded bluff overlooking the ocean, killing the engine. The silence of the wild rushed in, crickets, wind, the crash of waves. Draven leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. "Make it quick." Genevieve unbuckled and turned to him, shirt off. He cracked one violet eye open. A corner of his mouth twitched. "At least buy me dinner first, little wolf." "Shut up," she muttered, though her cheeks heated. He sat up and unbuttoned the ruined shirt, shrugging it off. Genevieve's breath caught. His back was a map of violence. Old scars, silver and jagged, crisscrossed his skin, but fresh claw marks raked down his left shoulder blade, oozing dark blood. The wounds weren't closing. "It's necrotic venom," Draven explained calmly. "Hollows poison the wound to stop regeneration. It stings." "I need to clean it." She poured antiseptic onto a gauze pad. As she touched the wound, Draven hissed, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. "Sorry," she whispered. "Sorry." "It's fine," he gritted out. "Just do it." She worked efficiently, cleaning the black ichor from the cuts. As she worked, she felt the strange energy in her hands again, the golden warmth. Without thinking, she laid her palm flat against his skin, over the worst of the gashes. Heal. She didn't speak it aloud, but she felt the intent flow out of her. Draven gasped, his back arched off the seat. "Genevieve," he choked out. Under her hand, the skin knit together. The black poison sizzled and evaporated. In seconds, the angry wound was a faint pink scar. She pulled her hand back, staring at it. "How?" Draven turned in his seat to face her. His chest was bare, heaving slightly. He looked at her, not as a king looks at a subject, but as a starving man looks at a feast. "The Void King is cursed," he said, his voice raw. "My bloodline consumes. We take, we destroy. We are the darkness that keeps the greater dark at bay. We cannot heal. We cannot create." He reached out, taking her hand, the one that had healed him. He pressed her palm against his chest, right over his heart. It was beating wildly, out of sync with his calm demeanor. "For 1,000 years, my family has waited for the counterbalance," he whispered. "The Lightwood, the Sunbringers. We thought your kind was a myth, a bedtime story to give us hope that we wouldn't eventually be consumed by our own shadows. Genevieve felt the thud, thud, thud of his heart against her palm. I'm the counterbalance. You are the light, Draven said, and I am the void. He leaned in. The air between them crackled. It wasn't just pheromones anymore. It was metaphysics, opposites attracting with the force of gravity. If I kiss you, Draven warned, his lips inches from hers, I will not be able to let you go, not to the council, not to your grandmother, not to fate itself. You will be mine, Genevieve, bound to the dark. Genevieve looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the monster the world feared, but she also saw the protector who had thrown himself into a horde of ghosts to save her. I was never free anyway, she whispered. Draven closed the gap. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision. It tasted of blood, rain, and desperation. It was a claiming, primal and absolute. When his tongue swept into her mouth, Genevieve felt a snap in her soul, like a tether locking into place. The mate bond fully realized. The world fell away. There was only him, his heat, his weight, his taste. He pulled back breathlessly, resting his forehead against hers. His eyes were blown wide, the violet swirling with gold flecks, her gold. We have to go, he rasped, though he didn't move. The temple of the first moon. It's in the forest. If the prophecy is true, if you are the key. Then what, she asked, dazed. Then we have to open the seal, Draven said, before they break it. But the prophecy said if the lock turns, the void drinks the world. Interpretations vary, Draven said, a dangerous smirk returning to his lips. And I intend to rewrite the ending. He started the car, the engine roaring to life. But as they pulled back onto the road, Genevieve looked in the side mirror. Far back in the direction of the city, the sky was purple, not the purple of sunset, but the bruised, unnatural purple of a tear in reality. The seal wasn't just breaking. It was already shattered, and the monsters were coming. The Blackwood Forest was not merely a collection of trees, it was a living, breathing entity that had been old when the mountains were young. As Draven's armored SUV tore through the overgrown logging trails, branches lashed against the windows like skeletal fingers trying to hold them back. The temple is not on any map, Draven said, his grip on the wheel white-knuckled. It exists in a fold of space, a pocket dimension anchored by the ley lines of the Pact territory. To find it, you cannot look for it. You have to need it. Genevieve watched the trees blur past. The golden hum in her blood was deafening now, a compass needle pulling her chest toward the heart of the woods. I feel it, she whispered. It feels like coming home. The car burst through a dense thicket and skidded to a halt in a clearing that shouldn't have existed. In the center stood the temple of the first moon. It wasn't a ruin. It was pristine, built of white marble that glowed with its own inner luminescence under the starlight. Massive pillars spiraled upward, supporting a dome that seemed to be made of liquid silver. It's beautiful, Genevieve breathed. It's a weapon, Draven corrected, stepping out of the car. He scanned the perimeter, his body tense. This is where the first wolves bound the chaos, and it is where we will either save this world or break it. They ascended the stairs. As Genevieve's foot touched the first step, the marble pulsed. A ripple of light shot up the pillars, igniting torches with blue flame. It recognizes you, Draven murmured, watching her with a mixture of awe and fear. The wards usually flay intruders alive. For you, they are lighting the way. Inside, the temple was a single vast chamber dominated by a central altar, a massive slab of obsidian surrounded by a pool of perfectly still water. On the altar lay a depression shaped like a hand. The prophecy speaks of a lock, Draven said, walking to the altar. This is it, the anchor of reality. If the Shadow Council breaches this place, they will use their dark magic to invert the current. Instead of keeping the monsters out, the temple will act as a beacon, drawing every horror from the void dimension into our world. And I'm supposed to do what? Genevieve asked, her voice echoing in the vast space. Lock it harder? You are the light, Draven said, turning to her. You don't just lock it, you purify it. The Shadow Council's corruption has already weakened the barrier. That's why the Hollows could manifest in the city. You need to burn that corruption away. He took her hand and led her to the altar. Place your hand there. Channel that light I saw in the library. Pour it into the stone. Genevieve looked at the obsidian slab. It felt cold, hungry. What happens to you? Draven looked at the entrance. The wind outside was picking up, howling with a sound that wasn't natural. It sounded like 1,000 screaming voices. I buy you time, he said grimly. A shadow sword formed in his hand, larger and more jagged than before. They are here. The air in the clearing outside shattered. It didn't break like glass, it tore like wet paper. A massive rift opened in the sky above the temple, bleeding violet and black energy. From the tier, figures descended, not just hollows this time, but the Shadow Council themselves. Figures in crimson robes, their faces hidden by masks of bone, floated down on currents of dark magic. Behind them, a legion of twisted beasts, wolves warped by void energy, their eyes burning green, poured into the clearing. Go! Draven roared, pushing Genevieve toward the altar. Do not stop. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not stop. He turned and walked to the temple doors, a lone figure in black against an army of nightmares. He didn't look back. Genevieve slammed her hand onto the obsidian altar. Pain. It wasn't physical. It was soul deep. The stone grabbed her, hooking into her essence. She screamed as she felt the weight of the entire world's barrier settle onto her shoulders. Connect, the stone whispered in her mind. Burn. The battle at the temple doors was not a fight. It was a slaughter. Draven Void was a force of nature. He moved through the enemy ranks like a scythe through wheat. His sword was a blur of violet lightning, decapitating void wolves and shattering hollows with every swing. He fought with a desperate suicidal ferocity, fueled by the knowledge that the woman behind him was the only thing that mattered in the universe. But there were too many of them. A bolt of green eldritch fire struck him in the chest, throwing him back against a marble pillar. He crumpled, coughing up blood. "The king falls!" a voice hissed. The leader of the Shadow Council drifted forward. He removed his bone mask, revealing a face Draven knew. It was Lord Malachi, a member of his own court, a man who had toasted him just hours ago at the gala. "Malachi," Draven snarled, struggling to his feet. "Traitor." "Visionary," Malachi corrected, smiling with rot-blackened teeth. "The void is not meant to be caged, Draven. It is meant to be ruled, and once we sacrifice the girl, her light will break the seal permanently. We will become gods in the new darkness." "Touch her," Draven growled, his eyes bleeding into full black, "and I will dismantle your soul." "Look at you," Malachi scoffed. "You are exhausted. You are bleeding. You are alone." Malachi raised a hand. The shadows around Draven solidified into chains, binding his arms and legs to the pillar. Draven roared, straining against them, his muscles tearing, but the magic was amplified by the rift above. "Watch, King," Malachi laughed. "Watch us extinguish your star." Inside the temple, Genevieve was burning. The energy required to cleanse the altar was immense. It was draining her life force, turning her blood to fire. She could hear the fighting outside, the screams, the roars, and then silence. She turned her head, sweat stinging her eyes. Through the open doors, she saw Draven bound to the pillar. She saw Malachi and his circle of sorcerers advancing toward the temple steps. No. "Focus!" she screamed at herself. "The lock!" But the lock wouldn't turn. The corruption was too deep. The altar was thirsty, but she didn't have enough light. She was just one omega, one glitch in the system. Malachi stepped into the temple. The air turned frigid. "So this is the savior," Malachi sneered, walking toward her. "Smaller than I expected." Genevieve didn't remove her hand from the altar. "Get out." "Brave," Malachi said, "but useless." He raised a dagger made of solidified void glass. "Your blood will grease the hinges of the new world." He lunged. "No!" The shout didn't come from Genevieve. It came from Draven. Outside, the king stopped fighting the chains. He stopped trying to break them with strength. Instead, he did something forbidden. He opened himself to the void completely. He didn't channel the darkness, he let it consume him. The chains shattered, not from force, but because the thing they were holding was suddenly too vast to be contained. Draven exploded into a cloud of living darkness, a hurricane of violet and black that swept up the stairs. He materialized between Genevieve and Malachi. He wasn't human anymore. He was a silhouette of man-shaped night, his eyes two burning stars of violet fire. He caught Malachi's dagger hand. With a sickening crunch, he crushed the sorcerer's wrist. Malachi shrieked. Draven didn't speak. He just tore. He ripped through the council leader with terrifying efficiency, tossing the broken body aside like a rag doll. But as he turned to face the rest of the horde, Genevieve saw the truth. Draven wasn't regenerating. The darkness was eating him. His physical form was fraying at the edges, dissolving into smoke. "Draven!" she screamed. "Stop! You're destroying yourself!" He looked back at her. His face was blurring, losing its features. "Open the lock," his voice rasped, sounding like grinding stones. "I can't hold it much longer." He turned back to the door, forming a wall of shadow against the encroaching army. He was dying. He was becoming a true void, a mindless singularity that would eventually consume everything, starting with himself. Genevieve looked at the altar. Then she looked at Draven. The prophecy. The void shall drink the world. "No," she whispered. "That's wrong. It's not destruction. It's thirst." The void was hungry. It was unstable because it was empty. It needed to be filled, not with the world, but with something else. Genevieve took her hand off the altar. The protective field vanished. The monsters surged forward. "Genevieve!" Draven roared, stumbling as his form flickered. She didn't run away. She ran to him. She threw her arms around his dissolving torso. It was like hugging a blizzard, cold, biting, emptying. But she held on. "Lux Vestra," she whispered against his chest. Take it all." She didn't push the light into the stone. She pushed it into him. The moment her light touched his darkness, the world went silent. It wasn't a standard silence. It was a vacuum, as if the universe had inhaled and held its breath. It wasn't an explosion. It was an implosion. Gold met violet, sun met shadow. The collision was catastrophic and beautiful. Genevieve felt her essence pouring out of her like a dam breaking, a river of white-hot liquid gold flooding into the abyss of Draven's chest. But where she expected to find an endless consuming nothingness, she found waiting. Draven gasped, a sound of agony and ecstasy that vibrated through her very bones. He had spent centuries as a container for destruction, a hollow vessel fighting to keep the darkness from spilling over. But now, for the first time since the first Void King took the throne, the vessel was being filled. The light didn't destroy the darkness, it illuminated it. It raced through the hollow spaces of his curse, turning the terrifying cold void into a warm velvet night sky. Where the void consumed, the light replenished. Where the void destroyed, the light rebuilt. Gravity reversed. They rose into the air, feet leaving the marble floor, suspended in a vortex of power that swirled with the colors of a nebula, deep indigo, electric violet, and blinding gold. The prophecy wasn't about the queen opening a door. It was about the queen becoming the door, and the king was the key. Together, Draven's voice echoed in her mind, not spoken but felt, clear and human, and resounding with a new, terrifying power. "We do this together." Genevieve opened her eyes. They were glowing pure white, seeing not the physical world but the energetic threads that bound reality. She looked at Draven. His form had stabilized, no longer smoke but solid, radiant power. His eyes were deep cosmic purple, swirling with galaxies. They turned toward the army of the Shadow Council. The monsters froze, sensing a shift in the food chain. The apex had arrived. Draven raised his hand, and Genevieve placed hers against his palm. Their fingers interlaced, sealing the circuit. "Let there be light," she whispered, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance of the first wolves. "And let there be night," he answered, his voice the thunder that follows the lightning. They pushed. A wave of energy was unleashed, not the searing burn of the sun, nor the freezing bite of the void, but twilight, the perfect balance. It was a wave of gray, silver, and purple fire that washed over the temple, over the clearing, over the forest. It moved slow, inevitable as the tide. When it hit the hollows, they didn't shriek. They simply unraveled. The dark magic that bound them was stripped away, returning their stolen energy to the earth. They dissolved into motes of harmless dust. When it hit the Shadow Council members, the effect was far more violent. Their shields shattered like glass. The dark pacts they had made with the void dimension were severed instantly. Without the borrowed power, their bodies withered, aging decades and seconds, leaving them powerless, mortal, and terrified on the cold stone. The beam of twilight shot upward, striking the rift in the sky. The tear screamed, a sound like metal tearing as the energy hit it. But the twilight didn't just patch the hole, it stitched reality back together, sealing the wound with a scar of silver light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The energy expanded, sweeping across the country, across the world. In the city, shifters paused in the streets, clutching their chests as they felt the vibration in their bones, the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted. The ancient fear, the constant pressure of the void dimension pressing against reality, was gone. The seal was no longer a wall holding back the ocean. It was a bridge, a symbiotic loop between the light and the dark. In the temple, the vortex slowed. The anti-gravity field faded, and Draven and Genevieve lowered gently to the marble floor. The light faded from Genevieve's skin, leaving her exhausted, her knees buckling. She fell forward, but she didn't hit the ground. Strong arms caught her. Draven was solid. He was whole. The darkness was gone from his skin, replaced by the healthy flush of life. The jagged scars on his face were gone. He looked younger, the weight of centuries lifted from his brow. He looked at his hands, turning them over, then at her, wonder and terror warring in his eyes. "The hunger," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's gone. The screaming in my head. It's just quiet." He looked at Genevieve. She was pale, barely conscious, her energy reserves utterly spent. "Genevieve?" Panic edged his voice, sharp and real. He cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "Stay with me. Don't you dare fade on me now." She smiled weakly, fighting to keep her eyes open. She reached up, her fingers trembling as she touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "Did we win?" Draven laughed, a sound of pure relief that sounded like a sob. He pulled her against him, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. Not fear, not ozone, but life. "Yes, little wolf," he murmured against her skin. "We won. We rewrote the ending." Outside, the sun began to rise, but it wasn't the harsh, glaring sun of yesterday. It was a warm, golden dawn that filtered through the trees, illuminating a world that was, for the first time in history, perfectly balanced. They found them there hours later, the royal guard, terrified and awestruck, kneeling in the grass outside the temple. They didn't find a monster and a victim. They found a king and a queen, asleep in each other's arms on the steps of the altar. Genevieve didn't return to waiting tables. The prophecy was fulfilled, but the work had just begun. The Shadow Council was dismantled, the rogue hordes integrated or exiled, but the biggest change was in the king himself. Draven Void, once the tyrant of silence, became the first king to rule with a council of Omegas, bringing an era of prosperity the shifters had never known. She still had the gold in her eyes, and he still had the storm in his, but they never feared each other again. They were the eclipse, the moment where day and night touch, proving that darkness is not evil and light is not always gentle. They were simply two halves of the same soul, finally home. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, made your heart race, or made you believe in the power of fated love, Please like this story and share it with your pack. Don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic tales of romance, magic, and destiny. The next chapter is waiting.